Hey, it's Jon and Will from the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast, and we just wrapped up our episode, Men and Therapy, with the amazing and outstanding Dr. or Doc, Shauna Springer. Listen to this snippet, and we'll get into the show here shortly.
There's just a lot of different therapies, and I think the big challenge is it's not so much the type of therapy, it's the type of doc that you really need to find. And for years, for Psychology Today, I've had a blog called Free Range Psychology that says you need to be versatile. And a psychologist is someone, to me, who is very experienced in the art of perception and can apply different types of modalities and techniques to different people based on what they need. So I'm not so interested in what modality is best as much as I am what kind of profile makes a good doc. And how versatile can you be to meet your patients where they need you?
What happens when two dudes, one a retired Navy SEAL commander in Colorado Springs, and the other a hippie meditation teacher in New York City, get together to discuss living mindfully? That's a great question, because we don't know what will happen either. Raw, uncut, and unapologetic. Welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness with co-hosts John McCaskill and Will Schneider. Each week, we take an authentic dive into how mindfulness continually impacts our lives, deepens our relationships, and allows us to be emotionally alive. We filter all of our conversations through the man box, where we unpack how as men we are expected to act in society, how fighting the authentic human experience is exhausting and damaging, and how mindfulness can help. Now, on to the show.
Hey, welcome to Men Talking Mindfulness. This is Will Schneider coming to you from New York City with my brother and co-host of another mother over there, Jon McCaskill over in Colorado Springs. I'm super stoked, and Jon is super stoked for our topic today, men and therapy. We're going to dive into and find out with our great guest why men don't go to therapy, what gets in the way, why therapy is considered for the weak-minded. We're going to have this conversation with our amazing guest, Doc Springer, and her name Doc for a specific reason. Doc Springer is a leading expert in PTSD and performance stress, as well as she has a best-selling book as well. We'll get more into her bio in a second. Jon, good to have you on the show today. So glad we're back, and you have some announcements. So
I do.
Good to be here, brother.
Always a pleasure, brother. Yeah, so our announcements are our partner, the Movement RX, our mindfulness and movement experience with Movement RX. The next cohort kicks off on October 27th. And if you're ready to improve your mental and physical wellness, join me and Will and Dr. Teresa Larson from Movement RX for this 21-day online journey. And I'll post the link here in the comments shortly. Also, our MTM Swag is out in the world, and Will's sporting one of our beautiful shirts there. And we're going to be opening up our MTM Swag store later this week on October 22nd again. And it's going to be open from October 22nd through November 7th. And that will allow you for delivery by the holidays. And we have a special holiday edition shirt that's going to be in there, along with new hats and beanies. And that all said, let's bring our guest up. There she is. Doc, good to see you. How are you?
Hey, Jon. Hey, Will. Good to be here.
We're excited.
Thanks for joining us, Doc.
Yeah, so Doc Springer, and again, we'll get into why we say Doc and not Doctor here shortly, but Doc Springer is a best-selling author, frequently requested keynote speaker, and one of the world's leading experts on psychological trauma, military transition, suicide prevention, and close relationships. She is the author of Warrior, How to Support Those Who Protect Us, and the co-author of Beyond the Military, a leader's handbook for warriors reintegration. She is a Harvard graduate who has become a trusted doc to our nation's military warfighters. She navigates different groups and cultures with exceptional agility. As chief psychologist for Stella, she advances a new model for treating psychological trauma that combines biological and psychological interventions. All right. Wow. Doc, again, pleasure to have you. And we're excited to get into this show. But first, Will is going to lead us in a grounding practice. Will, over to you, brother.
Great, great. So here we go. We're just going to use our breath as a way to calm your mind, ground your energy, allows John and I and Shauna probably to focus on the show a little bit and kind of ground some of our nerves. And again, you can use this practice anytime you're stepping into some sort of like high performance required meeting or something like that. It's amazing what the breath can do. So if you're sitting down, great. Find a nice comfortable seat. I suggest if you're sitting down, bring both feet down to the floor. Maybe even take off your shoes if you like. Bring your hands onto your thighs. If you're driving, just follow along. You can breathe and drive. You're doing it right now anyway, but we're just going to manipulate the breath a little bit. If you're out there in the world doing something out, walking around, walking your dog, you can stay and just breathe as well. So great. So find whatever that seat is or whatever the position, or maybe just stop walking for a second and just stand still and just look at the sky. We'll start with a nice little exhale through the mouth. Good. Take a gentle inhale through the nose and try to take a bigger breath all the way out, filling if you can from the bottom of or the top of the pelvis, the middle of the chest, all the way to the top of the chest, and exhale out the mouth. In breath big through the nose. Let that go out. Yeah. Good. Let's just take a few more in. Out through the mouth or through the nose if you like. Really work for a nice controlled exhalation from beginning all the way to the end, creating a nice peaceful quality of breath. And a couple more in. And out gently. Okay, let's do 4 more in really big with the breath. Let's just pause at the top of that inhale. Get very deliberate as you slowly let that exhale go all the way out through the nose. Noticing the pause at the bottom of the exhale. And then slowly begin to fill with that inhale again. Pausing at the top. Just notice your feet on the floor. Notice your hands on the steering wheel, or notice your butt sitting in the chair. And then exhale, let it go. Good. And 2 more in smoothly. Out soft and deliberately. We have one last one in really big. Out gentle and softly. Great. Just take a moment here. Come back to a nice, gentle quality of breath. Just take a moment to feel how you're feeling. Remind yourself why you're here. And when you're ready, open your eyes. And we're back, guys. Let's start the show. How we feeling? How you feeling, Dr. Shauna?
Good. No, it was nice. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Excellent.
Well, let's see. How do we kick this off? Let's see. So, Doc, hey, I had you on the Veterans Path podcast when I was running that earlier this year, and we both read your book, and we're going to cover a lot of the same stuff here today. But for our audience, let's get a little bit more human background on who you are besides your bio. Your bio is fantastic, but we want to know who you are, what brought you to where you are today, and then we'll get into the discussion on men and therapy.
Sure. Okay, so I would say I'll give you a little bit of extra that I don't really talk about in a lot of my podcasts and things that I've done, including probably yours. I played 3 varsity sports when I was in high school, and I was predicted by my senior class to replace Lace on the American Gladiators.
No way.
If you remember that show, the American Gladiator, I think they had a comeback recently, but there was this very brawny woman, and I come from Nordic stock. And at the time, being in sports, that was a big part of my life in high school. I was also pretty, fit and muscular at that time. And so I always had kind of like a competitive energy, and then got into martial arts in college and had no idea that I wanted to work with warriors. Pursued a traditional training. So I'm a psychologist, got my Ph.D., taught personal growth at University of Florida, go Gators. And so had a lot of fun with that. And that was my signature course. And then I started working with veterans at the Gainesville VA. And it just felt like home to me to work with warriors. And I didn't figure it out. And it was actually my sister. I was on a walk with her and she said, well, the reason why you're so comfortable with people who serve in the military is because dad raised us with the Great Santini as a parenting manual. And then like everything shifted and I really saw what she was talking about. Waking up for 5 a.m. in the morning runs with my brother and sister, running in the dark, competing in the track meet with like shirts that said property of, team, my maiden name, going to foreign, countries from the age of 10 alone for many years to be of service. And so these values of service to others and being brave and embedding in other cultures and forming trust across the cultural divide became formative for me and translated into what has been a really rewarding and fun opportunity to serve the war fighters of this nation. And then everyone who's suffered from trauma, kind of to branch out and say, here's what I've learned about people and how they can overcome unimaginable trauma. And here's how I can help us all kind of walk through trauma and build strong, lasting relationships. So that's a little bit more of the personal side of my background, but I'm happy to answer any questions and kind of drop in.
Well, I want to know more about American Glad. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to know more about that. That's not what we're here to talk about. But that is a first. I did not know that about you. That's hilarious. Will, over to you.
Well, this is a topic that's very near and dear to me. I have a lot of men in my life that just think of therapy as, for the weak-minded, like I said earlier, it's just something that's not going to be beneficial. So what are actually, when you're working with men, and it was very telling in your book about like some of those initial, or it could be for quite a while that men and warriors in particular show up at the office. What are some of the the common obstacles that you see men struggling with in order to even kind of get in and sit in a chair or lie down on a couch and speak to somebody about how they're feeling or what their problems are?
Yeah. So here's the really interesting thing. Because I have a foot in two cultures, civilian culture and military warrior culture, there was a really big difference when I was in private practice before I started working with warriors. I had a private practice and I saw men and women, very high achieving, highly educated men and women, and they were happy to pay a lot of money to come and talk about anything and everything. And I did not have no-shows. I had my first no-show, and the other folks in my office sent me a grievance card, like we're sorry for your loss, just to make fun of me for having a no-show, because people did not no-show in that practice. They came, they were excited to look at themselves, and that was time set aside, almost like they looked at me as almost a personal coach, but with a set of experiences and background in psychology that could really help grow them and get them to a better place and see the things they could not see in themselves, in their relationships, and really, move forward. So that was an entirely different feeling than I had when I started working with warriors. And the feeling I got in that kind of scenario was, okay, I wouldn't be here except my wife made me come, told me that I better come or, we're going to have an issue. And, I'm looking for any reason to never see you again, basically. Scanning the room. Everything I said, it was a test of, waiting for me to biff it so that they could say, oh, yeah, no, didn't work for me. I got, went into this session and she totally missed, the point or something like that. I had this feeling of walking on eggshells. And based on that, I realized in the warrior culture, for many people, not all, but for many people, my rank of having a degree and having a doctoral degree doesn't mean anything to them. In fact, it means that I have been in school for a long time and they don't know if I can offer them anything of value because they've had a very different life track and been in situations that most civilians can't imagine. So really different kind of worlds that they're coming from. So it's not all men, which was the really interesting thing.
Right. Well, it sounds like you're making a contrast between like the men that you talked about that are willing to come and like always were there. You know, it sounds like these are men that are looking to tap more of their potential, right? And using therapy as a means to kind of become more aware and then rise into that potential. Whereas like with the warriors, you know, it's just, you know, I mean, in your book is very telling, you know, there's a lot of information out there that on the researching this, it's like, you know, that some of those obstacles in order to get the therapy, it's like, it's, you know, it's for weak-minded people. I'm fine, you know, and it's like, I don't need to talk to anybody, even though they're like kind of drinking all the time and, you know, continually partaking in like abusive behavior or something like that. You know, so what are some of your thoughts around, you know, these ideas that men are for, you know, therapies for the weak, or, you know, these other kind of obstacles that men put in their way?
Right. So one of the things I've realized in retrospect is that absolutely warriors want to tap their potential too, but they have a tribe that they feel is that reference group, is that core unit that helps them reach their potential. And the therapist is outside that group. The therapist has a deficit of trust to overcome to become a doc, to become a trusted extension of that warrior's tribe. It can be done. Like, I'm a civilian, and one of the things I want to share with people is if I can become trusted by warriors and become an extension of their tribe, a trusted doc that they can say anything to, then anyone with the right insights can do the same. And that's part of why I wrote Warrior, is to help the healers who support warriors learn these insights and these ways of approaching their practice so they can deeply connect with and build that trust across the cultural divide with warriors. Now, the people that were the men you were first talking about, I think that's spot on, that they frankly saw therapy as a status symbol, and that these men, very different from the warriors, were creating a pit crew, a tribe, if you will, a core unit. And the people in that pit crew included their certified public accountant that helped them with their taxes, their financial planning folks, their therapist or coach, or a therapist that operated for them mentally as a coach, as I was doing, based on wellness. And so they were creating this circle, and the therapist was very much a prized part of that circle and on the inside, and somebody they were happy to pay for their insights and training. That did not translate to the warriors I serve. But understanding that helped me talk about therapy with warriors in ways that help make that gap close so that they can fully dive into therapy. And that's why I was excited to come on today and talk with you both, because there are ways to bring them to that place of seeing actually therapy is the harder thing to do. And if you choose not to pursue the work you need to get after, that leaves you helpless. And that's not a good place to find yourself as someone with warrior or male, any kind of warrior energy. We're talking about men today, but I think women can be warriors too. So somebody with that kind of energy, helplessness is the worst feeling to sit with and steep in.
Right. We always on the show, we kind of talk about masculine energy types, those who kind of have that false bravado, kind of beat their chests. Hey, I've got this handled, whether that's a man or a woman, but the masculine energy types, and that's quite often tied to the warriors. The warriors have that masculine energy, a lot of them. And in your book, and you just talked about the language that is used when you speak to men, when you speak to masculine types, when you speak to warriors, and how that has to be framed a certain way. Can you speak to that really quickly?
Sure. So I think one of the important things to realize is that as a healer, if there are any healers out there listening, you have to be really perceptive around where your normal practices communicate relative rank. So if someone comes into your room and you are behaving in ways that are normal for psychologists or therapists, and you were trained that way, but really, the other person is being kind of examined and they're being diagnosed, their deficits are being evaluated. We think of that in a very neutral way, as in, let me see what the picture is. Let me see how I can support you. Let me find out what the problems are that you're struggling with, right? But the end result for many warriors is that it feels like a kind of examination of the areas where they're struggling before you've built the trust. So the trust and how you build that and when you build that is a critical first step. And then when they trust you, then you can go after more of that stuff. Otherwise, what you do is you create a kind of false relationship with your patients or those you're trying to support, where they will, tell you something, but not the full story. And that might take a lot of work to undo later on. I had so many people tell me when I was first starting out, before I was really approaching my practice more like a doc, the first sessions that we had, I was deeply suicidal and didn't want to tell you. So I told you this story. So the first story you hear is often a test of trust, whether you're a coach or a therapist. So I think being aware of that is, one thing. I think also there's a really important thing for everyone to grasp around. The work in therapy is maybe not the most important stuff you're going to do to grow. Therapy is a great time to figure out what you should focus on and get insights. You can't arrive at yourself with the benefit of somebody else's perceptive abilities and their ability to ferret out what is the thing that's really eating you alive. But it's what you do between sessions, whether you're in therapy or in coaching, what you do between sessions is what grows you. And so if you can take that stance and you understand it's really never the therapist's role to drive the boss anyway. It's your role to come in and consult with them. And then you still have to do the work between sessions. That can shift some of the traditional dynamics that put the therapist on a pedestal and really bring them down here next to you, walking with you as an asset, as good gear on your growth journey. So that's kind of another thought that comes to mind. And I have a lot of other thoughts, but I don't want to monologue this. So
Well,
back to you guys.
No, I like how you make that distinction instead of it being like, oh, hey, the therapist is in charge and just do what I say and everything be fine. Whereas like you're an ally and you're in or almost like in the driver or like the passenger seat with them. It's like, well, maybe we'll think about taking a left here, and blazing this trail and seeing where we go from there instead of it just being like, just do as I tell you. So yeah, thanks for that. But Jon, what are you thinking here? What are you feeling?
Yeah, well, I want to come back to, some of the reasons that men or masculine types, again, avoid therapy and then ways to overcome those, Doc. We talked about the perception that therapy is for the weak. And I know, obviously your book is on warriors, military, veterans, and active duty. And there's a stigma within the military about seeking mental health. There's a perception that if they seek mental health support, they're going to lose their security clearance. But there's a lot of other reasons that people don't. So one, could you talk about the security clearance, one, and then two, other reasons that people don't seek, or men or masculine energies don't seek mental health, and why?
Yeah. So about the security clearance, that is a real and common fear by many people that serve in the military. I've actually been having conversations lately with my friend Jennifer Tracy, Jon, that you know as well.
Yeah.
And where our conversations have gone is around a lot of messaging that we see that says, it takes courage to ask for help. Everybody gets excited about that messaging. It goes out broadly. And that is not the calculation that people are making in many cases. Jennifer and I know how brave and how much courage warriors have. First responders and warriors are some of our bravest people. So that question is settled for us. So if it's not a matter of courage, then logically, what are people asking themselves when they think about going to therapy? In most cases, they're asking themselves, if I go to therapy, will I get a diagnosis in a medical chart that will impact my ability to do my job and stay connected to the tribe that I've earned membership in? So whether it's the military, you don't want to get sidelined. And there's a real fear that a therapy diagnosis or just going to therapy can get you sidelined. And there's an interesting thing that can happen where, military leaders will model the idea of, hey, I got help for something. But they have a little protection sometimes that people don't have in the lower ranks, in the relatively lower ranks. That sometimes the people of rank can say, hey, it's cool to get therapy, but their jobs are not at risk. The people that are of lower ranks sometimes fear, if I go to therapy, will somebody look to start med boarding me or push me out of the military? Will my team see me differently? Will they see me as unreliable? Will they be able to depend on me in the same way? That's a lot of the fear that a lot of warriors have, is that it will change people's perceptions and their respect for them. And that's going to take, go ahead, Will.
So where does that, so where does that, what is that thinking though? Like that thinking of the tribe and be like, wait, you're going to therapy. Then is it like, oh, well, you're just messed up or something's wrong with you. And therefore, like, you can't be part of our tribe anymore because of this problem that you have that, you're not going to tell us, it's for your therapist. So, what is that like, that tribal thinking of kind of breaking the mold within the tribe and seeking, mental health?
Yeah, well, it's usually an interesting thing because I have these relationships with different people in these circles. The thought process is usually like, okay, let's see what happens to him. He is going to therapy. Let's see what consequences, like, good for him. I want to watch how that plays out because I've been struggling with the same things. So people are looking at their brothers and sisters in arms, or, good for her, if it's a female warrior, but let's see how this plays out. And they're looking to see the connection between stepping forward, doing the work in a public way, and any consequences or not that come from them doing that, taking that risk and stepping forward. So it is partly the individual, but it's partly how the system responds. I think that has to be acknowledged. If you're in a system or a chain of command where a person can go do the work and come back online and just kind of fall back in with their team, then that truly is how you earn trust with a system that allows for people to get healed without the consequences. So in some systems, there just isn't that culture. And I don't think, urging people to get therapy without mindfulness of those consequences in those systems is the right call. And that is why Jennifer and I have worked so hard on the Master Guide for Mental Wellness. We've created 2 journeys that are together. Every week, people can get a video, they get insights, they get take-home points, they get questions to drive reflection, they get, exercises to apply these insights based on my book, Warrior, How to Support Those Who Protect Us, and Jennifer's book, From the Deepest Darkness to the Light of Hope. And so we wanted to create an alternative for people to gain insights in a truly confidential and self-paced way that they can do, by themselves, with someone they trust, like a spouse or a partner, or with a group of people that they deeply trust, and kind of work through that journey themselves if they are in a situation where they can't safely get the support, because that's a reality for some people. For others, it's just an untested fear. And for others, to your point, Jon, there's a lot of messaging around therapy being weakness or kind of, and I think that's about the fear of being labeled, diagnosed, and, sort of seen as having problems, like dividing the world into patients and people who are not patients, which is a false thing, I think. And it's so clear to me because the warriors I talk to, they all struggle deeply at times with dark thoughts, with suicidal ideations, with feelings that they're the problem that needs to go, with moral injuries, with shame, with guilt. These are very common among the warriors that I serve. And so they're all sort of holding this privately and looking to see what happens to the next person if that person steps forward and says, I want to work on this.
Mm. Yeah.
Mm.
The
That's
the other things that kind of stand in the way that I know of is, people that they already mentioned, or you mentioned the tribe, and people, men, masculine types, warriors, often say, well, I've already got a tribe that I lean on. I've already got a spouse or a significant other that I lean on, and I vent to them. That's my therapy. Or my other way of dealing with what I'm struggling with is I'll drink until I'm numb, or I'll take antidepressants until I'm fine. How do you overcome those narratives?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I would say that comes from people who have never had a relationship with a really good doc,
Mm.
because it's really important to have, loving people around you that you can drop your emotional armor with and talk about anything, but it's different than working with someone who has keenly perceptive insights that can see the things you can't and understand mental warfare and the kinds of struggles that happen on that domain. There is expertise there that you can tap. And, Will, you've really spoken eloquently of the value of therapy. So I almost kind of want to bounce that question to you and say,
Yeah. Yeah.
in your experience in therapy as a consumer who benefits
Mm.
from it, what is
Yeah.
the difference between talking to your therapist and talking to your hairdresser or your, spouse or your buddies?
Well, yeah, thanks. It's a great question. And I think there's a few things, and it really comes back to what you said earlier about trust. It's like, I look at my relationship with my therapist. It's like I'm hiring them to help me, right? But I also have this safe place that I can just dump whatever I want, whatever's coming up for me for that week or that month or something that's bothering me for that day. I can talk about it very openly, very candidly. And I have like a trusting relationship with my therapist. And I know he's going to listen. I know he's not judging me. Like he's there to support me, and he's there to help me and to, again, have that, give me those insights. And also where what's helped me in these therapy sessions is my willingness to go there, my
Yeah.
willingness to open up, to be honest, to say I don't know, to cry if I need to talk about some of my most difficult and challenging parts of my relationships. And it also not just like always like trying to seek solutions or get that insight, but there's also this release. I'm not holding it in anymore. I have a
Yeah.
place to go, that I have this safe place that I can just dump all my stuff. Whereas if I like go to I don't have a hairdresser, Sean, I have a barber. Okay. So I have a barber. Right. So,
Wait, did you just filter that through the man box? Did that
Totally.
get-
Thank you, Shauna. Well done. Well done.
Okay. So I'll tell Paul that he's now my hairdresser. I'll see
I
what he
dropped
says.
that for you just
All
to
right?
see what you
Like,
do with
Paul,
it.
you're a hairdresser. He lives across the street from me. But
The man box shows up.
yeah, the man box totally shows up. It's like, but it's like, I mean, I can, I could maybe talk about my problems with with my buddy or John or something like that. But I know, but I also don't want to be that, burden in some way to my friends. It's like, there are those opportunities when we can, John and I can talk deeply about something, but it's not like, I just want to be like, oh, hey, oh my God, John, I'm having this thing. It's like, I think there's a time and a place where I know my time and my place and where my place is when I'm booking that appointment, when I'm like hiring somebody to help me. So it becomes like this, it's a formal thing instead of it being a friendly thing. And in that form, right. And there's certain like formality, I guess, in the way that we operate and we work, that I just bring myself to it because of that courage, because of that willingness, and I just jump in and go for it.
That's very well said. There's something very special, right, about what you create with a good doc or a therapist. It's a special set aside place to do that work. It's work to do therapy. And The thing that is a sort of fatal logical flaw to me of the idea of I don't need a therapist because I have a really loving partner or wife or, brothers that I trust, is that there is a limiting factor inside of most warriors that is protective instinct. So just like you said, they will always limit themselves from the depth of really going after what they're actually feeling because they don't want to be a burden to someone they love. And so they won't talk about like all of it. Now you're talking about, okay, I'm going to go to this therapist or this doctor, and they are professionally good at taking people through a growth journey, and nothing I say to them will shock them or surprise them if they're a good doc. And they don't socialize with me. So this is a special set aside thing that's not going to, it's compartmentalized from the rest of my life, which is really helpful with somebody who's professionally good at being perceptive and seeing insights. And I want to give you an analogy for that, for video game people. I've actually been getting into the Legend of Zelda lately. The original one.
Classic.
Oh,
I
really?
just
The
beat the
original?
game. Yeah, I couldn't do it as a kid. The 1986. Yeah,
I
I
was going to
know.
say,
I know.
oh my God, I
amazing.
remember that. That's
It's so
amazing.
good. Sometimes the old stuff is best stuff. So my
Yes.
sister came up recently for a visit, and she brought the old Nintendo that she found in the garage from years. It dusted it off, and I had ordered through eBay they've got to get the Legend of Zelda here. So those two things came together, and then I lost a lot of hours of my life beating this game late at night. And when video games originally came out, not that I'm a huge gamer, but before the Legend of Zelda was a class of games that were like Dungeons and Dragons, where you would be this character and you would tunnel through this wall of rock and you couldn't see anything but what you pickaxed in front of you. And then you would open up this chamber, like suddenly and surprisingly, and there'd be this monster that you'd have to defeat. And then you would go blindly tunneling through the rock again to the next challenge. That was like the original video game. And that's a little bit like people that are not therapists trying to help you. Is you'll be tunneling through rock together, and then suddenly you'll open up something like, oh my gosh, like this is what this relates to. Or here's the thing that's really eating me alive and causing my suicidal ideation. And guess what? They're not going to know what to do with that sometimes. And they're going to be worried that they're going to let you down. They're going to be worried that they're going to say the wrong thing, that they're going to impact your relationship. And what a therapist, a good doc can do is say, oh yeah, I know this terrain. I've been here before. Right. So then I'm thinking about my progression as a therapist when I was in training. So I was tunneling through the rock at first with my patients and, oh, here's something. I don't know what this is, but let's see if we can figure this out. And then the next phase is games like Legend of Zelda, where you get one screen at a time and you see all the enemy combatants on the screen, but you only get one screen and then it shifts over to the next screen. And then you had games that you could see the whole terrain, like Civilization, like you could see all the mountains, the landscapes, where the towns are, where the enemy is. That is what being a really masterful therapist can feel like, when you can see all of the arc of where people need to go to grow, where their pain is. You can ask the right questions to help them get those insights. And most people can't do that. And so I think, in today's society, we've really, unfortunately, diminished expertise, diminished the value of expertise, and promoted the idea that, coaches and therapists, they all have the same training. No, I mean, there are some great coaches, but therapists have 8 years of school and did a 200-page dissertation to really look at human behavior. I know I did. And so there is value in that expertise. You cannot get that from online, resources, or the way you can with a really qualified person who really gets it. So finding that person feels really important to me as far as people's growth.
And you hit on something there in the the fear. If you are sharing that, you're kind of tunneling through that rock and you come across that monster with your significant other or with your barber or hairstylist or beautician or whatever we want to call it today, if you get across that monster, that could negatively affect the relationship. Like I can imagine if I'm sharing with my spouse some of the things that I'm battling with up here. I go to therapy every week, and I think it's huge. But if I shared some of the stuff that I shared with my therapist, with my spouse, I think it may negatively affect my relationship. And so I think having that therapist there not only helps me mentally, but it also keeps me from potentially damaging a relationship that I very much care for. Obviously, my spouse, I very much care for that one. With my hairdresser, my barber, beautician, I care about that too, but not as much. So I think, right.
Yeah.
But there's also, the coming back to that false bravado, right? And again, this could be for the warrior, it could be for the men, it could be for the masculine energies, is that we're told from when we're very young, hey, boys don't cry, get your shit together, or we hear the saying, hey, you're struggling with something, man the fuck up, and that's
go for a run, walk it off,
go for a run, rub some dirt on it, and right, and how do we overcome that in society? How do we overcome that?
So all of that to me translates to do whatever you need to suppress that. Just don't confront the problem directly. And that to me really is not manning up. It is not. It is the easier path. If, and this is part of warrior, like if you really zoom out for a second and you say, okay, so you didn't want to come here. Your wife pushed you to come here. So what is the easier path? Sitting here with me and talking about what's really going on, or avoiding this experience entirely? Any one of my patients would have said, no, avoiding this is the easier path. So avoiding facing the challenges directly is the easier path. And manning up in this context is finding a good doc, creating that compartmentalization that Will was talking about, that you're talking about, Jon, because you're absolutely right. Warriors will not share with their spouse some of the things that are going on in their head, nor with their brothers, for the same reasons. They worry, will it impact my relationship with these people? Will they think differently about me? And they all have the same kind of thoughts, which is sort of an interesting thing to me. Like a lot of people struggle with the same sources of shame and the same private feelings. And I know this because I see them privately, right? I wish I could kind of just say, hey, you're all thinking the same thing, but that would be destroying everybody's confidentiality, right? So I just say in a general way, like these thoughts that whatever you're ashamed of are not uncommon. And part of what I wanted to do with Warrior, with my book, is put that out there. So there's a section in the book where I talk about, I'm sitting in a circle with a bunch of warriors and I say, when you're at the end of the tunnel and the voices of your demons are strong in your head, what are they saying to you? If that voice said something specific, what does it say to you? And, some of the things that come out of there are, you're a terrible husband and a father. You should be locked away in a 5x5 cell on an uninhabited island so you can't damage anyone else. Or if your wife knew what you really think and what you've really done in your life, in your past, whether I'm not just talking about combat, I'm talking about off duty, I'm talking about, all the things that you've done as a human, she wouldn't let you anywhere near the kids. Those thoughts are common. Those are the voices of despair. They're common.
Yeah.
But you don't know that unless you talk to a good doc who says, oh yeah, I know this terrain. I know this mental warfare that you're in. I've seen this before. Here's how you walk through this valley. Here's how common this is. You're not the only one that has these thoughts, and so on and so forth. So therapy is the harder thing. It's a harder thing to do. And we need to change the definition of manning up, because if enough people that you respect get therapy and say, hey, I find that valuable and it helped grow me into a stronger person. I've never been clearer, sharper thinking than after meeting with this doc. Then people will start to really understand this, and therapy will change.
I think John and I are finding, through the show, all the reading that we're doing, the people that we're having on, that manning up really is authenticity, compassion, vulnerability, right? Courage, right? Being bold, right? In the face of adversity, right? And things that make you uncomfortable. And that's, and are those, I'd imagine that those are some of the qualities that you would want to bring into a session. Is that correct? Like just that openness? Or what makes a good, so what makes a good session? You know what I mean? Like what, to make the most of your time and your money, right? And your efforts, right? How should I be in that session? Or what would you recommend?
Yeah. Before we get to that, if I could, I want to talk about how the therapist needs to show up with men.
Yeah, please.
Yeah,
like you mentioned,
let's
you mentioned what's doc versus doctor. You said good doc a bunch of times. So yeah, please flesh that out. Thank you.
Yeah, part of our training sometimes as psychologists and behavioral health folks isn't very helpful for working with people that are warriors, because we can be compassionate to a fault in a way that feels like we are, taking pity on someone. Warriors are allergic to pity. And I think sometimes therapists can kind of be overly warm and kind of coddle their patients in a way that is so aversive to people who are prideful, rightfully prideful about their own history and life experiences. So I think, bringing in a little bit of American Gladiator energy is helpful in therapy. If you're a female, if you have that sort of spirit in you, bring that into the room. You don't want to show, so much kindness and compassion in a form that will feel like the person is down here and you're up here taking compassion and pity on them. That's the wrong call. One of the things that I think works really well is, in addition to doing martial arts, and that has helped me get comfortable with my own aggressive impulses and know that I have them and, that I can hold those in the room. I was actually in a summer camp once where it was a soccer camp, and I was so aggressive, they took me off the girls' team and put me on the boys' team. And so that was fun. And I really enjoyed playing soccer with a bunch of, men and, feeling like I could just kind of be in the mix with them. And I think it feels that way too in therapy, where my attitude is get up and fight, and I will walk with you, but I will never work harder than you're willing to work for yourself.
Right.
That's a really important distinction versus really, taking people through a process and doing the work for them and, facilitating the whole thing and trying to make it as painless as possible. I don't promise that. Therapy is painful in its work, and it's a challenge, and it's a challenge befitting a warrior, and facing your problems directly is the way to get through them. And so having that attitude of, I don't pity you, I respect you, and we're going to walk through this together is a really important way to show up when you're working with military veterans and other warriors.
Wow.
So
thank you.
One of our questions there, and it's actually one of the questions we had planned on asking you. So Randy, I think, is reading our notes there. But when looking for a therapist, what's your recommendation for how to go about finding the right therapist, the right doc, if you will?
Yeah, this is a problem that will resolve itself in time when enough people like you both talk about seeing good therapists. Because if enough people talk about seeing good therapists and start to form kind of a resource repository of who the good docs are, people won't have to ask. They'll say, oh, John McCaskill or Will, recommends this person, right? That is a huge way to find out whether somebody is really, when I was doing clinical work, that's how my referrals came, is somebody would say, oh, this is who I would recommend because, this was helpful to me. So there's a kind of underground railroad or word of mouth thing that becomes really important in finding the right person efficiently. There are therapist locators. If you don't have a lead or you want to kind of start there, I know Psychology Today has one. EMDRIA.org, EMDRIA.org has one for EMDR certified therapists if trauma is something that you struggle with. But what I would do in all cases, in fact, I was just helping a friend do this yesterday, is we jumped on the emdria.org website. She wanted to work on some trauma stuff, and she's out of state, and I'm her friend, so I'm not going to be her therapist. But as her friend, I took a look at all the profiles on there and said, here's who I think sounds good in terms of their background. I want somebody that took the time to put a picture up and then go into the sessions with these 3 people and ask them these questions and see how they respond. Because it's a little bit like, not in any other way, but a little bit like dating, in the sense that don't assume that you're going to like find the right person right away. You might have to look and be discerning and not find the right person a few times before you find the person that's like, okay, this person has the right balance of challenge and support. And they will push me and not take, sort of take my stuff and just unquestioningly accept it. They will ask questions. They will push me in a way that feels like they're going to grow me and not just kind of reflect everything I say and, unconditionally support everything I say. I don't really do that kind of therapy. I think if, as a therapist, you're also there to work. Your patient is not just there to work, you're there to work too. And so you better kind of be actively thinking and working to understand and help them see things differently and create new challenges that are unique to them and who they are. And that requires a lot of work on the therapist part. So you want to ask certain questions like, how would you address these problems? What approaches would you take? If you had to assign me one thing to do between this session and the next session, what would you assign me and why? That's a really good question to ask, because that tells you, does the therapist just think that they are kind of the savior here and that, you're going to come into sessions and they're going to drop wisdom on you? Or do they see you as empowered to change the things in your life, and that the white space between therapy is where change happens? And they're going to work with you to find those challenges and then hold you appropriately accountable to grow. And so the type of challenge they would come up with, if they could think of something, is it based on you or is it based on some manual? Is it something that anybody could recommend? Here's a sheet of common thoughts or something. I want you to fill this out, versus, well, I learned about you today that one thing you're really interested in is this issue or this problem. So between now and next week, I want you to go and find out more about those things and come back to me and report back on these things. What did you find out? Where did you take action? That's a tailored treatment plan that sees the individual sitting right in front of you. And so those are the kinds of things I'd be looking for in a good doc. Is you want somebody who's not on autopilot, kind of relying on kind of a standard way, but active, perceiving you, looking at who you are. And they may use empirically supported therapy methods, but you feel like they're really seeing you in the room and basing their ideas on your specific conversations.
Great.
Well, real quick, I want to talk about those who are in crisis mode, if you will. And I know the facts and figures show that there are more suicide attempts among women, but there are more successful or completed. I don't want to call it successful, but completed suicide for men. And I know that has to do with their access to weapons or their desire to use weapons like guns for suicide. And in your book, you talk about quite a lot about when a lot of therapists, when they talk to warriors, when they talk to men, they say, do you have access to a firearm? And person says yes. And then the instant reaction is, well, let's take your weapon away. But what that does to someone's psyche when you say, I want to take your weapon away, and what you recommend rather than that. Can you talk to that?
Sure. So it goes back to the part of our conversation today about the fears that keep people from engaging in therapy. So part of that is, will I lose my place in the tribe? Will this impact the work I do, the military career that I have earned, my role in the police force, all of that? And owning a weapon and having access to that weapon is an extension of many warriors' identity. And so when in the military, somebody says, they start to question the access to your firearm, that is an emotionally loaded conversation with somebody who is usually ranking higher than you, looking at you saying, I don't know if you can be trusted with your firearm, right? So that is central to the identity and relevance of that person. And of course, they're going to move to protect that. So it becomes a serious obstacle to many people to go to therapy, to stay with therapy, when we sort of like blunder into that conversation without any awareness of the emotional meaning of the connection many warriors have with their firearms. It's also back to the earlier part of our conversation related to the trust you've developed with someone. So often these questions come up early in the treatment process, very like in question forms that are given, in an intake, a first appointment or second appointment, before you've had time to develop any trust. And they don't know what your motives are. And so there is a perceived fear often that your motive would be to remove the firearm to protect themselves from any outcome or liability of a veteran who's suffering, having a firearm and dying by suicide. And so what that does is it puts the therapist and the veteran in sort of like an adversarial relationship where there's a perception that the therapist has this motivation to remove the firearm and sort of emotionally, how do I want to say this? I'm just going to say it, emotionally castrate the warrior
Wow.
by removing that weapon.
Yeah.
And you haven't earned the credibility to have that conversation right away. So a lot of civilian and other therapists don't really understand firearms, don't feel a level of comfort with them, don't know the terms related to describing them or the parts of a firearm. And so when they get into these conversations, that all becomes very clear. And then the veteran wants to have nothing to do with that conversation. So in Warrior, in my book, I talk about really what the emotional meaning of the firearm is and how we can come at that conversation in a different way that is respectful of the fact that warriors are firearms experts. And if you get into an adversarial relationship with them, where they perceive that you're going to try and remove their weapon, then that will go nowhere fast and will probably cause them to drop out of treatment that could have been life-saving for them.
Wow.
And so the conversations I propose in Warrior and the techniques and the methods that I use and I illustrate in the book really show people how to have a different conversation that aligns with the core values of warriors, aligns with their protective instinct, and doesn't pit us against them. But as Will was saying, I'm here and I'm walking right next to you, and we're going to figure this out together.
Wow.
Love that.
Well, we touched on some, or didn't really talk about in particular, but what are some of the different therapies out there? Or, you mentioned, EMDR and maybe there's like cognitive behavioral therapy or something like that. What are they? What's a good start place, I guess, depending on what people need?
Yeah, well, before we get to specific therapies, one of the big realizations that I had that matters for serving warriors is the understanding that I've developed in the past few years that many people who serve, whether they're deployed to combat or not, have a certain group of symptoms where their fight or flight system is chronically on. They can't calm down. And that is a biological injury, that's not an invisible injury. We can see it if we have the right brain scan, and that can be healed. And that should be healed before people go into therapy. Because here's why. So for years as a trauma psychologist, I would sit in a room with people that were not really there. They were there, but they weren't really there. They had constantly, distracted process by their mind, pulling them out of the room back to these trauma memories and trauma experiences. And they were too activated weren't calm, so they couldn't really hear me. The same way that if you went to your cancer doctor and you were going to get a diagnosis, they would say, bring a friend, because if your doctor says, I'm sorry, you have cancer, you're not going to hear much else after that. So you bring a friend because you're overactivated. Your adrenaline shoots up and you can't really hear what the next steps are. So your friend comes in and they take notes from the doctor about what the next steps are for the cancer treatment. Same way with people who are chronically overactivated. They're not sleeping well. They're flooded with anxiety or panic. They're flooded with irritability or sort of rage sometimes. They have difficulties concentrating. I mean, that's a direct impact of that kind of biological exposure to high stress or trauma, is that their fight or flight system is locked on. So one of the things that I've been involved in the past few years, and I've co-treated with the physicians who administer this injection. About 100 patients that I've followed have gone through a stellate ganglion block injection. And this is an injection of a routinely used anesthetic medication in a cluster of nerves in the neck, right about here. And it helps to calm an overactive fight or flight system. And so when you get people calm in their own bodies, then there's a window of opportunity that opens for them to really approach therapy without feeling totally jacked up in their bodies. And it's a totally different experience. Once you have laid the groundwork for healing the injury, then you address the underlying thinking and behavior. And because I believe and want to honor, what you and Jon are doing, Will, in terms of leading by saying, hey, I, find therapy really helpful. About 2 weeks ago, I went down to our San Diego provider, John Howe at Stella, and had him give me an injection in the neck. I don't suffer from post-traumatic stress, but I haven't slept in years. And Jon knows, you've gotten a few 3 a.m. emails from me, I'm sure. And the cool thing is I have a Fitbit here. So it has sleep data on it. And I could send you, it'd be interesting, I could send you after the show, last, night, good sleep, like really good sleep, the night before, good sleep. It's been qualitatively different for me ever since I've had this injection in terms of my ability to like downshift at the end of the day. And so I think mindfulness, meditation, what you are about is critical in pairing with the stellate ganglion block and the therapy that works. And then you do the mindfulness, because that teaches people to create a new normal and be able to regulate their body state as they move forward. So putting those things together, to me, is the way we need to move. It's the new standard of care I think we all need to have for people that have those symptoms.
Thank you.
So coming up on the end of time here, Doc, I don't know, I want to be respectful of your time. What are some things that we haven't spoken about that you want to make sure the audience hears?
Well, let me get back to Will's question really quick. So I want to make sure I hit that. So after the stellate ganglion block, there may be a number of therapies that can be helpful. I was just at the Navy SEAL Foundation Impact Forum, and there's some research emerging from University of Texas Health Center around combining stellate ganglion block with prolonged exposure therapy that seems to be promising, but I haven't seen the results yet. Dr. Craig Bryan is going to be working with Sean Mulvaney and Jim Lynch to do a study on how, and you might know Sean because he's a SEAL, how stellate ganglion block might work with cognitive processing therapy. Those are the two kind of commonly used therapies for trauma that the VA generally rolls out. There's also EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which I was trained in by a retired colonel and found to be very effective with some adaptations for warriors, some strategic adaptations. And really, there's going to be a lot of new, therapies coming out. There's an article I heard coming out around kind of reconsolidation of traumatic memories. I'm interested in seeing how that research looks and what's showing up. And then this year, I'm going to be launching a podcast called The Story of Our Trauma, where I'm going to be talking to survivors, experts, therapists, just a wide range of folks really about how we recover from trauma. And some of those episodes are going to focus on what happens after SGP and what's most helpful for patients that have trauma. But then there's interpersonal therapy for depression. There's excellent couples therapy. BCBT is one of them. John Gottman has done some really interesting work that can help people. There's just a lot of different therapies. And I think the big challenge is it's not so much the type of therapy, it's the type of doc that you really need to find. And for years, for Psychology Today, I've had a blog called Free Range Psychology that says you need to be versatile. And a psychologist is someone, to me, who is very experienced in the art of perception and can apply different types of modalities and techniques to different people based on what they need. So I'm not so interested in what modality is best as much as I am what kind of profile makes a good doc and how versatile can you be to meet your patients where they need you.
Great answer. Yeah, thanks.
And you are that doc. Now everybody's going to be calling you up.
I don't do therapy anymore.
Yeah.
But
I don't think we actually, in the beginning, it's like, in your book, you make a distinction of, a doc versus a doctor. And, you in reading your book, it's like you almost get a badge of honor being called a doc because all of a sudden trust is now part of that relationship. So you're no longer like a professional with a great piece of paper and lots of diplomas on your wall, which might seem impressive to some people, but like to develop that relationship and that trust and actually be called a doc. And that's why I enjoy that you like being called Doc Springer, really like shows you where you have taken your patients and the trust that you've gained from your patients, and because of that willingness to be open, to listen, to be patient, to be compassionate, and not have this like hierarchy, like, oh, I'm better than you, I'm going to judge you. It's really like, again, being that ally, and walking with them and helping them to get to those questions, to get to those, those opportunities for growth. So
that is super meaningful to me. And, I'm just looking at my background right now. I don't usually sit here in my office when I'm doing, conversations, but behind me, there's two super important things to me that remind me every day why I do what I do. One of them was a gift from Sergeant Major Doug Castle, where he took a piece of marine camo cloth from an actual uniform and had my logo, the Doc Springer logo, embroidered onto this piece of cloth and sent it to me in a frame. And that is super meaningful to me. And then there's the bulldog between there because I'm close to Marines. And then SEAC, Ramon Colon Lopez, gave me a challenge coin when I saw him a couple months ago. And I want to mention him because Ramon is somebody who really believes in people doing the hard thing and getting therapy. He's been very open about how mental health support has been critical for him. His wife, Janet, is awesome. The two of them are a powerhouse. And he has personally committed to helping create a culture where people of all ranks can get the help that they need without, suffering consequences. If they can go back and do their job, that they can get healed and go back and do their job. So he's somebody who is really mission aligned with a lot of what we've talked about today, and a leader that I'm excited to see in a position of authority personally right now. But thank you for this. And if anybody wants to have me as a therapist, but not really be their therapist, check out redefineyourmission.com, because that's where you'll get access to the master guide for mental wellness. And it will take you, I'll give you a video every week and a little, it's like a personal journey that takes you through my book, Warrior. I see Ed Nicely's on here who has gone through that. And good to see you here, Ed. And so that's the way that I'm trying to sort of scale up what I used to do one-on-one to as many people as really want to benefit from that.
Beautiful.
Right.
Beautiful. We'll make sure that's shared in the show notes and in the chat later today. And we're going to also broadcast this, an encore presentation of this, because I know it's filmed in the middle of the day, but we'll broadcast an encore edition of this later today, this evening, so people can watch after work. That said, Doc, what's the best way besides the redefineyourmission.com for folks to get a hold of you if they wanted to find out more about you, your mission, your book, etc.?
Yeah. Okay. So my website is just, I'm going to give you the www.drshaunaspringer, DrShauna Springer, because I see some people are interested in the stellate ganglion block shot. And you can go to that website and learn about my book, The Master Guide for Mental Wellness. And I've just loaded on there where you can download a white paper I wrote about stellate ganglion block. That's 35 pages with all the research and background that you'd want to know. So all of that is on that website. And I'm also doing more paid speaking. So that's also a page on that website. And I'd love for people to think about having me out as a speaker if that's something that your organization is looking for. Thanks, Jon. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
Of course. So
Beautiful.
We'll get into the closing here. And if you're comfortable doing so, Doc, we're going to run through just a closing practice similar to what we did at the beginning. But this time I'll run through it. I look a mess today because my little boy decided he wanted to crawl in bed with me at like 1 a.m. So I look like a disheveled man because I feel like one.
Yeah, Jon, I'm disappointed, man. This is a professional show. You look very
I know,
slovenly.
right?
You got to pass today, Jon. You got to pass.
All right. Well, that said, like Will mentioned at the beginning, if you're in a place that you're safe, that it's safe to close your eyes and you feel comfortable doing so, go ahead and do so. Otherwise, just listen and maybe soften your gaze and just lower your eyelids a little bit and stare down just at the bridge of your nose, again, if it's safe to do so. And just bring your attention to your breath. Don't feel that you need to force it. Just bring your attention to it. Pay attention to the physical sensation of breathing, the breathing in, noticing the air inflating, expanding your lungs, your chest, your belly. And as you breathe out, noticing the air deflating, your lungs deflating, your chest, belly contracting. And now what I want you to imagine and think to yourself is just think about peace, love, and compassion above you, peace, love, and compassion below you, and peace, love, and compassion all around you. And now take that peace, love, and compassion that is above, below, and all around you, and imagine that same peace, love, and compassion inside you. Peace, love, and compassion above, below, around, and internally, inside you. And now imagine yourself through the rest of your day carrying that peace, love, and compassion that is inside of you and bringing it to others, sharing it with others, showing it to others. Let's close with one deep cleansing breath together. Begin by breathing out all your air, bringing your navel to your spine. Breathe in deep in through your nose. Hold at the top and let it go nice and slow, slow, slow. And as you're doing so, come back to the here and now, this space, this time. Here we are together, wrapping it up. Doc, thanks so much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your experience, your wisdom with our audience and with us today. We sincerely appreciate it. And we're going to look to have you back at some point down the road to further delve into this. This is a topic that can't be talked about enough, but thank you so much.
Thank you both. I had fun being here.
Yeah. Awesome. Thanks, Doc. Really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining Will and Jon on Men Talking Mindfulness. If you enjoyed the show, please like and share it with your friends and family, and please, we would appreciate a review too. Until next time, this has been Men Talking Mindfulness. Thanks for showing up.